Hello. In this video we're going to take a look at a chunk of code a student asked about. Specifically, really the student's asking about string methods. But we're also going to talk about methods in general and highlight some important things to keep in mind when you're learning to use methods. So essentially, here's the code that the student asked about. Whenever I run this program, this is what it prints out. And the question is why? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down each section and look at each line individually. So I'm going to start by taking these ones and getting rid of them. So let's cut these and let's put them down here. So if I uncomment this code here and I run this, you'll see I get W, A, -1, W. So what I've essentially done is I've taken this line and I've broken up into chunks. So when I look at this line, I'm going to work from the inside out. So essentially, system.out.println prints out whatever is generated inside of here. So I'm going to step 1 is I'm going to find the index of u. Step 2 is I'm going to add 5 to that value. Step 3 is I'm going to figure out s1.char at that position. And that's why we end up printing out the char. Before we look at that, let's start by talking about strings in general. It's really important that when we talk about strings we understand two words, length and indexes. These words are also applicable to arrays, but this is a really important thing. Software has a length of 8 and the indexes are 0 to 7. Indexes always start at 0 and go to 1 less than the length. Whenever you look at a word, you always want to think about its length and you want to think of its indexes. And more specifically, whenever you look at a string. So what I've done down here is the first thing I've done is I've taken this s1.index of u and I've placed it down here. So let's start by breaking this down. So the question is, what does index of do? So we want to make sure we can find the documentation online. So if you go to the internet and you do a Google search for the string class in Java, you should come up with this documentation here. Now I will say it really doesn't matter if you get Java 6, Java 7, Java 8. String class is the same. There could be some little changes in there, but for what we're doing, there's no difference. And this documentation can be very intimidating. There's a lot of it. What we're interested in right now is looking specifically at methods. Methods are small chunks of code that will do something and might give you something back. So these are all the different methods in the string class. Look at them all. You're never going to memorize them. Don't bother wasting your time. What we're interested in is finding the method that we're actually using. In our case, we're interested in using index of. So it might be a little confusing here because you'll notice there's a method index of, but what it takes is not a character but an integer. This is a little bit of a technical idea here, but Java will treat characters as integers. Turns out that every character is mapped to a specific integer value in the ASCII table. So if we look at for the letter U here, there's small u. Small u gets mapped to the number 117. So it's a little deceiving here because you might try and look for a method that takes a character, but in fact we're using this method here. So index of returns the index within the string of the first occurrence of the specified character. So the three things we want to always identify when we talk about methods. We want to talk about the name of the method. We want to talk about what it takes. So this takes a single parameter, which is an integer. We want to talk about what it returns. If you click on the name of the method, you'll jump down to some more documentation, and you'll notice here at the bottom there's a little explanation of the return value, and it says, essentially, it returns -1 if the character does not exist. So if we come back to our documentation here, we see string s1 software, there's no u in here. So if I execute s1.index of u, we generate -1. Let's change this u and let's take, for example, O. s1.index of O generates 1 because O is in position 1. If I go s1.index of S, it generates 0 because S is in position 0. To call a string method, I have to have a string that I'm actually going to use. And so here I see the string s1 is a string that I'm applying the index of method to. So basically what happens is, again, our example is u in this case. We're going to find the index of u in S1. We're going to store it in the integer a, so we get -1. And then the next step is I add 5 to that, which is right here. So -1 plus 5 is 4. And so now let's figure out what s1.charat does. So again, let's go back to our documentation. And let's find that method charat. And there it is. It returns the character value at the specified index. So again, the name of the method is charat. It takes an integer as a parameter, and it returns a character. So s1.charat, a plus 5, so I'm going to add 5 to the value of a. So in this case, if a is -1, let's run this again. A is -1, -1. A equals -1, so -1 plus 5 equals 4. So I'm looking for charat 4, so let's look at the word software. 0, actually let's do it here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it returns the character W. And that's why when I run this, C outputs as W. If I put A plus 6, I'm going to get A. There's A. Okay. So now let's take a second and let's look at the second line that you wanted me to analyze. I'm just going to pause here for a second. So the second line that we want to analyze, we run this. It finds the index of where, which is a string, and then it adds 6 to it. So we could break that up simply by first finding the index of where. We add 6.0, 6.0 being a double, and then we print out the value of that double, which is 10.0. So let's go back into our documentation. Let's find index of, again. And you'll notice this index of is a little different. Remember, we want to know the name of the method, what it takes, and what it returns. So this method is called index of, but this one takes a string. So essentially, this returns the index within the string of the first occurrence of the specified substring, meaning part of a word, and it returns an int. So if I come here, I want to find the position of W-A-R-E. So if I look at my word, there's W-A-R-E. So it's giving the index of where that starts, which would be 4. So this is essentially going to return 4 plus 6.0. Now there's a subtlety here that's really important. Index of returns an integer, so that's why I wrote 4, not 4.0. So since I'm adding an integer and a double, I know this is a double because it has 0.0, it's going to generate a double. If I come over here and I put int, I'm going to get an error because what it's saying is 6.0 is a double, I can't put a double into an integer. Remember, I can put an integer into a double, but not a double into an integer. So we'll call that a double. And we run that. Let's change it up a little bit. So let's instead of looking for where, let's look for ft. Right? So again, if I'm looking for ft, let's go to our word. ft is right there. We see that starts at index 2. So that means this is going to generate, if we change this, and let's change it in both locations, it's going to generate 2 plus 6.0. And if I run that, I get 8.0. So let's pause this. Okay, so let's finish off by analyzing this line of code here. So I see that I'm printing out s1.substring13. So again, if I don't know what substring does, I'm going to go to the documentation. I'm going to look for substring. There it is. It takes 2 parameters. It takes a beginning index and an ending index. And, oh, that's subsequence, pardon me. There it is. Beginning index and an ending index. I click. Here's an example. So hamburger.substring48 returns URGE. So it is inclusive, exclusive. So if I jump back to my program here and I take a look, inclusive, exclusive. So if I come in here, I want 1, 3, so it's going to return O, that's in position 1, F, that's in position 2. It does not include the position 3, so you get OF. So s1.substring generates OF, and then I add to it F on the end. So if I run this, I'm going to grab part of the string, add F to the end of it. We can add strings together, and it just essentially puts them together. So let's add one extra line here. Let's go system.out.println W. So here it prints off, and then it adds an F to it. So I hope this helped. One last point I want to kind of highlight is that when you're reading a method, you always want to look at the return, but you want to check if the word static is next to the return type. If the word static is there, it means you call it with the name of the class. So most of the string methods don't have the word static, so I have to have a string that calls it. So s1.char add, s1.codePoint add, s1.codePoint before. Another good class to get used to using is the math class. Notice how all of the methods are static, meaning that they're static next to the return type in the documentation. It means to access this method, you have to go math.abs, math.acos, math.exp. So good luck. I hope this video helped, and of course, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to ask.